Hello everyone and welcome in. I'm echohack and this is your Barbarian Skills Guide to help prepare you for the Diablo 4 launch. In this guide, I'll go into detail on each and every Barbarian skill and share my analysis on the class as it stands today. You'll see helpful skill cards like this throughout the video, so if you're unfamiliar with the skill, then you can read its effects right here. Even better, this is the first class video that I have on the channel where we can make comparisons with previous versions of the game. I and other MAXROLL creators were able to play a significant amount of time back in December's press preview beta, so you'll actually see a few comparisons scattered throughout the video here from these early skill card prototypes that I have back from December. One major change is with the key passive Gushing Wounds for Barbarian, and you'll want to watch to the end of the video so that you can see that drastic redesign. Barbarian is the class that I have the most hours played in, clocking in at easily over 100 hours, including all the hours from the press preview beta back in December, and the reason for that is that it's easily one of the strongest classes in the game. As a melee class primarily, Barbarian is a little bit more challenging to play, but a skilled Diablo veteran can spot the incredible potential underneath this rough surface. It's important to remember that skills are just the blueprint or the foundational layer of a class's capability, and you won't really see the Barbarian's true power until you gain a significant amount of legendary aspects later in the leveling stages of the game. All that said, let's jump right into our basic skills. Lunging Strike is our first skill, and it's my personal choice for a Barbarian leveling skill. Not only does it have a decent damage value at 30%, but it also adds an important bit of mobility to the class from the very beginning. Take the Battle upgrade while leveling for a little extra bleeding damage. It's yet to be seen which basic skill will be in an in-game Barbarian build, but Lunging Strike is a good contender just for its extra movement on the battlefield alone. Bash is another strong early choice for a basic skill. While I think Lunging Strike's mobility gives it an advantage, Bash still has the same 30% damage value while allowing you to stun enemies and gain percentage life as Fortify, one of the strongest defensive mechanics in the game. Still, you don't want to invest too much in a basic skill, and this is for leveling and utility only. Your true damaging skills will come later in the core and weapon mastery sections of the skill tree. Since utility matters more here, take the Battle upgrade for the extra fury so that you can spend it on more useful skills. Frenzy is easily Barbarian's worst basic skill, and I don't recommend that you pick this up at any point. While the bonus attack speed here seems inviting, the melee range and the short duration of the Frenzy buff make this skill DOA. Even worse, we haven't discovered any aspects or uniques that really buff Frenzy in the game yet, so it's destined to be simply a poor choice for most players. Remember that the whole point of basic skills is to gain furies that you can use better, more effective skills than these. It's optimal to not use a basic skill at all if you can avoid it. Flay is a powerful basic skill choice for Barbarians looking for a bleed build. Bleed Barbarian is incredibly powerful, and 36% damage is pretty strong during leveling. If you find yourself leaning towards a bleed build, then consider Flay during your respec and pick up the Battle upgrade. Thorns might also be a viable leveling build, and if you're going Thorns, make sure you pick up the Combat upgrade instead. All right, now we go down to the core skills, and our first one is Hammer of the Ancients. Hammer of the Ancients is one of Barbarian's best core skills, enabling you to generate and spend huge amounts of fury with its enhancement. And while it's a close-ranged skill, it's not the same in your face range as Flay or Bash, enabling skilled players to better dodge attacks and position their Barbarian defensively. Finally, the Furious upgrade is absolutely insane, since you can stack even more Fury through items than the base 100 Fury that you get out of the gate. That means you can inherently get that 100% multiplicative damage right out of the gate with Hammer of the Ancients, with potential for even more, especially if you find reliable Fury generation through resource legendary aspects on your rings. Whirlwind is a good Barbarian core skill with some strong potential for leveling, especially with the Grasping Whirlwind legendary aspect. Dealing damage on the move and also gaining resource is extremely valuable while leveling, because you won't have all of the maxed out resource aspects that you'll need for a truly killer endgame build. However, the low 14% damage value and the low damage on its modifiers, there's not much room for this in an endgame build. I think that's really capable of smashing through anything in late endgame. It also suffers from needing to attack in nearly melee range, leaving you open to attack from nearly any enemy. All that said, Whirlwind will be a solid choice in the mid to late leveling process, perhaps levels 20 to 50 or so. Upheaval is one of Barbarian's best skills, dealing incredible damage at ranged in a forward cone-shaped AoE with a relatively low cost for its incredible impact. Not only that, but it can stun enemies, and the violent upgrade gives an incredible amount of berserking time. During early leveling, Upheaval is very expensive to cast, so getting consistent berserking is impossible, and it suffers in some boss fights and single target damage. However, later on, once you have some resource legendary aspects, this easily becomes one of Barbarian's best damaging skills, and I can guarantee that you'll see in-game builds centered around this skill, if not Hammer of the Ancients. Keep this one on your short list of in-game viable damaging skills. Now on paper, Double Swing seems to have a strong damage modifier at 36% per swing, but its hyper melee range makes it incredibly risky to use. This makes the skill effective during situations where your Barbarian is taking no damage, but the lack of AoE damage here and the inability to use it at range gives this ability a very low utility. The Violent upgrade offers a free Vulnerable, and Furious gives 2 additional seconds of berserking, both of which have pretty good utility. But unless there's a way to make Double Swing useful at a slightly larger range than the in-your-face melee range that it has now, defensive positioning becomes effectively impossible at higher levels of play. I'd avoid Double Swing for now and during the leveling process. Rend is our final core skill, and it's an incredible one and the center of any bleed build. With 96% bleeding damage, the ability to extend Vulnerable by 2 seconds, and a 12% multiplicative bleeding upgrade built into the skill, you can dish out incredible bleeding damage with this skill alone. The amount of damage this can dish out makes it in-game viable as well, but it does come at the cost of being an in-your-face melee skill. Casting Rend is a bit dangerous because of the relatively slow attack animation, leaving your character open to attack by faster monsters. Now, while I think ultimately Upheaval or Hammer of the Ancients are stronger due to their increased cast range and berserking capabilities, Rend does have a place in any Barbarian bleed build from leveling to endgame. The core skills have a few passives on it for Barbarian, including Pressure Point and Endless Fury. Both of these passives are fairly tame, and they can pretty much be ignored during the leveling process. Instead, invest your points more deeply in your core skill of choice before moving further down the tree. Neither of these passives also have much potential for endgame builds, so I'd look elsewhere for investing your other skill points as you get closer to level 50. Next up is our defensive skills. Ground Stomp here, it's a poor defensive skill that doesn't offer much utility for us, and it can safely be ignored for almost any build. The 3-second stun here isn't as valuable as it might seem on paper because the range of Ground Stomp is also somewhat poor, and the Fury generation on the tactical upgrade can be gotten better from other sources like Barbarian Shouts. I should also mention here that there's a minor error on my skill card. Shout should not be a tag for this skill, and I'll have that fixed in the next version of these cards in the next version of this video. Iron Skin is another tepid defensive skill, but it does at least have Barrier, which can be difficult for Barbarian to find either through legendary aspects or other skills. Still, there's no unstoppable or other capabilities on this skill, limiting its potential compared to some of Barbarian's Shout skills. I'd avoid Iron Skin if you can. Challenging Shout is one of Barbarian's best defensive skills, and maybe one of the best defensive skills for any class across the entire game. It should be an auto-include in almost any build. It offers an incredible 40% damage reduction, which can be increased further by dumping more points into the skill on top of the 20% multiplicative bonus maximum life and 3 Fury every time you take damage. The relatively long cooldown here, however, means that you will desperately need to find sources of cooldown reduction to keep this buff up, but pulling the 25-second cooldown down to 8 seconds or close to 8 seconds appears achievable for 100% uptime. Even better, some niche Thorns builds can stack the strategic upgrade for damage that scales based on your maximum life, giving you damage and survivability all in one neat little package. Rallying Cry rounds out our defensive skills with another Shout, and it is a strong utility skill, and the only skill in the game that I'm aware of that both generates resource on cast instantaneously and has a cooldown. While 25 resource for free is nice, it's even better because this skill has almost no animation, meaning that you can cast it while moving and with little pause between your damaging attacks. Even better, it turns your Barbarian and your allies into a living Shinkansen by giving you 30% movement speed, unstoppable, and insane resource generation. Rallying Cry, when combined with Leap, make the Barbarian the absolute fastest class in the game, and that makes its in-game farming potential extremely high. You'll likely prioritize Challenging Shout over this one, but put at least 1 point into Rallying Cry right away for the incredible movement speed that it offers, getting you from objective to objective quickly. The Barbarian passives on the defensive tree add some damage reduction, but aren't very useful for most builds. These include Imposing Presence, Martial Vigor, Outburst, and Tough as Nails. Now, Outburst and Tough as Nails are both critical to pick up for any Thorns build, so if you're going Thorns, then you need to prioritize these passives as soon as possible after you prioritize Challenging Shout. That said, taking damage to deal damage is a poor strategy for any endgame build, so only expect Thorns builds to be viable during the leveling stages of the game, or just for funsies. Most Barbarians can skip over these passes without worrying and instead dump additional points into their main core skill or into Challenging Shout for additional damage or damage reduction respectively. Now we head down to the Brawling tree, which gives us several key Barbarian skills. First up, we have War Cry, which is our third and final shout skill. While War Cry is the least useful of the shout skills, there are builds that utilize all shouts, so it can be an important skill to pick up regardless. During leveling, I'd skip War Cry at first to instead pick up the absolutely key movement skill Leap, but you may come back to respec into this later. Keep War Cry on your radar, and especially if you find some particularly powerful legendary aspects around shouts. Charge is our next Brawling skill, and it's not a bad one as it offers Unstoppable, Knockback, Stun, and Vulnerable. Still, the skill can only travel in a straight line, making it less useful for mobility than Leap, and it does not offer any resource generation, making it less useful during the leveling stages of the game. Perhaps at endgame, this skill can find a use for the extra utility that it offers over Leap, but I think Leap just overall is a better skill that outshines Charge by any metric. Leap is an absolutely critical skill for Barbarian, and it is an auto-include in nearly every build. It is practically as powerful as Sorcerer's Teleport, and situationally is even better because of its reduced cooldown and power upgrade, which offers 40 Fury for free. When leveling, prioritize the first 3 points in the Brawling tree into Leap immediately, as it will offer you an insane increase in your character's mobility both offensively and defensively. When traveling across the world, make sure that you move your mouse cursor all the way in the top left or top right corners to make use of the maximum travel distance of Leap. Kick is an interesting skill that has the potential to do insane damage with the power upgrade. However, its 17-second cooldown and the melee in-your-face range that it has prohibit it from being a true contender for an endgame build right now. Still, if all you want to do is lots of melee damage, consider Kick for your build, especially if you have some source of infinite resource generation to power the power upgrade. The Brawling tree has several passives on it that are important to include in any in-game build to make maximum use of the berserking buff or of shouts. First, we have the completely ignorable passives Swiftness and Quick Impulsives, which don't do much for any build and should be completely ignored. If you have a reliable trigger for berserking, then you should definitely drop at least a few points into the mini berserking passive tree here, including Aggressive Resistance, Prolific Fury, and Battle Frenzy. And finally, if you go for the build with 3 shouts, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, then make sure you pick up 1 point in Booming Voice and as many points in Guttural Yell as you can. It effectively functions like an even stronger version of Challenging Shout when you have any of your shout buffs up for the entire party. You may even want to put more points in Booming Voice to keep the effects of your shouts up even longer. Raid Leader is also an option here, but it's fairly ignorable as healing per second isn't a particularly valuable stat. As you reach the Weapon Mastery tree, you will unlock some of Barbarian's critical finishing moves, which can drastically increase your damage output either while leveling or at endgame. First up, we have Death Blow, which is important to immediately take for every leveling build. The damage output of Death Blow here can't be ignored, as it offers 120% damage right away and has the potential to reset the cooldown entirely. As you're leveling, you'll go from struggling with certain mobs to killing them instantly over and over again with Death Blow. Even better, it offers the Barbarian an early source of damage against bosses, which the class typically struggles with overall. The Warriors upgrade here automatically triggers berserking, potentially giving you limitless amounts of berserking as you kill enemy after enemy. Later on, you might optimize Deathblow out of your build in favor of something else, but there is a potential Deathblow endgame build theory craft out there. The problem right now is that the damage can be inconsistent, because if you don't reset the cooldown by accident, then you have to wait a very long time to deal damage again. So the theory crafters out there will have to figure out how to solve that problem in order to make this a truly viable endgame build. Rupture offers a finishing move for bleed-based builds, and overall it's an important piece of your rotation to keep the attack speed buff up from the warrior's upgrade at all times. Still, there are arguments for not taking this ability altogether, because it actually removes bleed from enemies affected by Rupture, which is not always a positive thing. I find that the attack speed here is the most important part of the skill, as it will enable you to more quickly apply bleed stacks with rend and other damaging abilities. Steel Grasp is the weakest of the 3 weapon mastery skills, and frankly, it doesn't offer much beyond the pull-in effect. Necromancer and Whirlwind with the grasping legendary aspect offer much better sources of a pixel pull, so this is unlikely to land in an endgame support-oriented build either, like you've seen with Ancient Spear used in Diablo 3. I'd avoid this skill for almost any build. The Weapon Mastery tree offers some extremely useful passives for the Barbarian, and you should consider taking them. First, we have a small damaging tree with Pit Fighter, No Mercy, Exposed Vulnerability, and Slaying Strike. These can offer a moderate increase for your build in damage, and if you find yourself with some extra skill points laying around and you need to deal more damage, then I would consider making a pit stop here during your build. Otherwise, the investment here might be better used in other more defensive trees, like the defensive mini tree here, including Thick Skin, Counteroffensive, and Defensive Posture. Thick Skin in particular is a very interesting one because it gives percentage-based life as Fortify anytime you take direct damage. And I think this is maybe the only trigger in the game that does this, making this truly a unique way of gaining Fortify. Add Defensive Posture in the mix, and you have yourself an incredibly tanky Barbarian that's ready to take as much damage as they can dish out. Finally, there are 2 more passive nodes that are critical for bleed builds, including Hamstring and Cut to the Bone. If you have a bleed build, take only 1 point in Hamstring and dump 3 points into Cut to the Bone immediately, as you cannot ignore an 18% multiplicative increase in damage for 3 skill points. That's a really good value. Now, Barbarian is lucky enough to have some of the most impactful ultimates in the game, unlike most classes. As you're leveling, you'll want to immediately pick up Call of the Ancients, as it increases your ability to occasionally clear the screen with insane damage. The skill, however, is on an extremely long cooldown, so eventually you'll optimize this out of your build, but it definitely is the strongest of the 3 during the leveling stages of the game. Now, next up is Iron Maelstrom, which functions kind of similarly to Call of the Ancients. It has an incredible amount of screen-wide damage in a Kratos God of War style attack on an incredibly long cooldown. Call of the Ancients, I believe, is stronger than this out of the gate for leveling, but Iron Maelstrom might have a niche use in sort of like a weapon swapping build later down the road. Right now, the theory crafting suggests that a weapon swapping build is too clunky for any real serious usage, but if it does become viable at some point, then Iron Maelstrom is a top contender for a spot in that build. Now finally, we have the most useful of the Barbarian ultimates, Wrath of the Berserker. This is an incredibly easy way to trigger berserking, and it also provides a source of Unstoppable, making it a defensive as well as offensive skill. The second enhancement here means that Wrath of the Berserker will really shine the best towards endgame once you pick up infinite resources to spend, meaning that you can stack 25% multiplicative damage bonuses again and again as you slam through your Fury resource. Even still, you might find that the very end game that you can optimize out Wrath of the Berserker like you can with every single other ultimate in the game, as it takes up one of your precious 6 skill slots that can be better utilized for a damage or defensive skill without such a long cooldown. Now, the ultimate skill tree has some important passives to pick up for Barbarian that you don't want to miss out on. First, we have a tree that can be critical for certain endgame builds like Hammer of the Ancients. These include Wallop, Concussion, Brute Force, and Heavy Handed. Concussion in particular is useful as it offers some critical utility when all you're doing is hammering away at enemies, but if you have the extra skill points beyond this, you can score some huge gains in damage bonuses as well here. There's a 3-node passive cluster here off the ultimate node, including Tempered Fury, Invigorating Fury, and Furious Impulse. Invigorating Fury here is particularly interesting, as any build in the game will always seek to spend Fury as fast as possible to deal damage. So healing 3% of your maximum life constantly while dealing damage is an optimal route, and you'll never have to stop to drink a potion ever again. Just deal more damage. Your only bottleneck becomes how fast you can gain Fury, and if you manage to put together a respectable in-game build, you should always have a source of infinite Fury anyway. While leveling, you can probably ignore this passive as you won't spend 100 Fury all too often, but definitely swing back around to this passive at your level 50 respec. There's one more node here all by itself on the ultimate passives, and that's Duelist. Sadly, there's not much utility for one-handed weapon attack speed right now, but should dual wielding become a better build, then you'll want to eye this passive for some attack speed increases. Finally, we reach the bottom of the skill tree to our key passives. Key passives are critical for any build and for any class, but Barbarian somehow manages to get some of the strongest key passives in the entire game. Now, Necromancer still has the #1 best key passive in the entire game with Ossified Essence though, sorry Barbarians, and you can check out my Necromancer guide here for more details on that one. You can only select one key passive, so make sure that you choose wisely. Unconstrained centers around a build that seeks to have berserking up at all times, and you'll want to include this while you're leveling, especially if you're using Wrath of the Berserker or Deathblow's berserking mechanics. Later on, you can probably take a better key passive, but out of the gate, this one is easy to use and it packs a punch that you can use to increase your overall uptime of a critical build. Walking Arsenal is clearly designed for a weapon swapping build. Now, right now, weapon swapping is a bit too clunky to really be considered a super viable build, but if one is discovered and the meta changes after launch, then you'll want to keep an eye on this one. Even then, this key passive might still be extra clunky to use. It requires swapping between all 3 weapons within 6 seconds of each other at all times, which is a huge thing to ask of players. Right now, I'd avoid this key passive if possible. Unbridled Rage is Barbarian's best key passive by far, giving you an insane 135% multiplicative damage modifier to your core skills. The increased cost here is actually a benefit too for super endgame builds when combined with Invigorating Fury, as you'll constantly heal yourself while spending an increased amount of Fury. There are other aspects too that will reward you for spending Fury as well, so this is, in my book, one of the best passives just in the entire game, and perhaps it'd be #1 if Ossified Essence on Necromancer didn't exist. Still, this can be a kind of difficult to use during the leveling stages of the game, so save this one for your level 50 respec or when you unlock some hype resource drops on rings during your leveling. Now, our last key passive is Gushing Wounds, and this one is a hard requirement for any bleed build. This was actually significantly changed during the press beta, and you can see the side-by-side comparison here. It's important to note that damage over time like bleed, poison, and burning cannot critically strike. So this key passive essentially gives you the ability to critically strike with your bleeding hits. This radically changes the viability of bleed, and if bleed builds come out on top at endgame, then it will be because that you can critically strike with this key passive. Thanks for watching. If detailed information like this interests you, then please subscribe. Also, let me know down in the comments what your favorite Barbarian skills are and what build that you're thinking of putting together for launch. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.